I'm so excited to finally touch base with you. We have Joel Brennan here who's running for governor. And I have seen you talk. I've been to an event. I thought you did great. We haven't had the chance to connect one on one really though. So hi, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Okay, let's dive right into it. I want people to know a bit about your background because you were up in the air first with some commercials about and your kids were in them. I loved them. People know I'm from a marketing background, and I thought that was just like a very effective, sweet commercial, and it seems like your kids really like you, so kudos to you on that.
You
But
you
one of the
can
things
you
you
can
talk
you
about in
can
the
talk to them
commercial,
separately, but I think so. I think we all get along pretty well.
I'm sure they were on their best behavior on camera. I know how that goes. One of the things you mentioned in that commercial and making sure people know who you are is that you were Ever's top cabinet official. For the folks and those of us that are like less politically engaged or following along that like aren't really involved with the whole ecosystem of the administration and everything, can you explain a little bit about that role and what you did there?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I was secretary of the Department of Administration, and in Wisconsin, really, it's the top appointed official, and it has several responsibilities that really are about how do you effectively run the executive branch. So it's things like putting together the state budget, ensuring that you do all the procurement, the information technology, acting as the human resources wing for 35,000 people across state government, doing diverse things like negotiating the compacts with the Native American tribes over gaming, working with local units of government. And so it really is something that's about how do you effectively make sure that the executive branch is operating. And in addition to that, I did it for 3 years, and about two-thirds of that time was COVID. And so we had the added
Mm.
responsibility during that time of, trying to figure out how do you get federal resources to family farms that were struggling, to small businesses, to renters and homeowners. So there was additional times of doing that job in what was in some ways the worst of times for people in the state of Wisconsin. I can tell you, like that was the time that I was proudest of working alongside people in state government. Yes, the governor and my cabinet colleagues, but also just people who names that we're never going to know, that not going to be household names anywhere, but they were doing stuff because they knew that if they didn't, people might die, that there was going to be no hope for them. They were going to lose their homes, their place to live. Like that's something that, I mean, public service is an honorable thing, but when you see people rise to the occasion when they are absolutely needed, like that's to me the essence of why people get into government at every level.
Yeah, we never want a crisis, but boy, when we experience one, you really understand who is made for that moment. And it's always those people who, yeah, step up, figure it out, like will push any boulder out of the way. And you're so right. There's so many people behind the scenes in government that make so many things happen.
Yeah.
And
Where
I
their
I like
response is
the
their response is, "What else can I do?" In some way, like,
right.
"I'm doing all this, we're gonna keep doing it, but what else? What else can I do?"
Mhm.
That to me is as good as it gets.
Well, and I love the way you explain that actually, and it's like almost and correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like if you're like almost comparing that to a corporate world, it's almost like if the governor's CEO, what you were doing is like the COO and really like making sure a lot of the operations are moving smoothly and connecting with everybody and managing a lot of that behind the scenes work. Would you
Yeah,
say that's sort of a fair representation?
it's not always the most public role, but it is the way that you are ensuring that all of those things look like that they are operating efficiently and effectively. But it's also, I think back to the earliest days of the pandemic when it was everything was disrupted. We had to figure out what was going on with the state budget. We were coming to the end of the fiscal year, and the governor said to me, okay, we better go cut 5% of this year's budget because we don't know what's coming. And so, I gathered, there's two of us here. There were probably 15 in a Zoom meeting that we had at that point, and it was all the people who, all the agencies represented, the UW system, the technical colleges, and we all said, okay, this is our virtual kitchen table. We're going to do what people have done in their own homes. What can we cut? Where can we do it? I wasn't exactly the most popular guy in Madison when that was going on, but it was necessary to do, and we found $70 million, and then we did it again for the next the next budget year and we found another $200 million. Like, I think that's also the way you've got to operate. Where again, it's got to be, what are we doing to plow forward? What are we doing to make sure that we're still meeting the needs? But when there's times of crisis, when there's times you got to do stuff, like how do we roll up our sleeves and get it done?
Yeah, I love that, and I will say I'm definitely not the most popular when my husband and I sit down to go over the budget, either, and where I tended to go over budget, so that's a relatable note. But on that note, and since you know so much about that process, I'm curious, so a lot of the candidates are out there saying, "If I'm elected governor, this is what I'm gonna do," and a budget is really like the flagship kind of piece of legislation that kicks things off and sets priorities
Yep.
for the governor and as the leader of the state and how they want to get things done. But can you tell us a little bit about like how that's worked in the past or how you would maybe change things? Because the people in the legislature really make the laws, and that's a lot of the policy that we're talking about, but the budget and the governor really sets the tone and the priorities. Is that right? Can you explain the process a little bit so people
Sure.
understand what we can do there?
Sure, and it's a process that would start on day one. I was appointed, or I was asked by the governor to become part of his cabinet in December of 2018, and immediately we got into work. And I'll tell you what was interesting is there was a Scott Walker budget that had been put together to that point, and the people who work in the state budget office, the next day they had to start working on a Tony Evers budget. You want to talk about people who are the right kind of public servants? Like, their job is not to be ideologues. Their job is to take what the governor says and say, this is how you execute it. And really the way it works is there are 1,000 decisions to make. There are individual programs, and you'll get a page on each saying, hey, here's what the current thing is. If you wanted to go up, this is what it is. If you wanted to go down, this is what that would mean. Here are the ramifications of that. Like, and you do that for issue after issue. And so, yes, it is a financial document. It's an economic development roadmap, but it's also a values statement. And so, I think that's the things that went into the governor's thing. That the issues that we brought up immediately were like the expansion of Medicaid and Badger Care in Wisconsin. That went into every one of the governor's budgets. Other things that we could do around investing in healthcare, changes we could make in education funding. Like, that's the vehicle for you to start putting all that foot forward. And that's the process by which you do that. Ultimately, it ends up with the governor. And that's where it ends up. But where it starts is, and where I would start, like the governor did when he was first elected, I'd go around the state and have listening sessions. We have said we would do as much outreach that we can to people around the state. People don't know everything about the budget. They don't know every detail, but they do know what the priorities are. And if we're not, as we're heading into our first budget, if we're not being responsive on issues around affordability for healthcare, around housing, around access to childcare, and what it means for the workforce, like, that means we're not listening closely enough. You don't need to be listening that carefully and closely to know that people are hurting and that those are the issues that people care about as much as anything else.
Right, exactly, and last budget I was almost gonna say last year, but I think it was 2 years ago, I guess, the last budget session when they were doing the listening sessions. I went to one here in Milwaukee, and it was interesting to see for me the whole process. I mean, it was a full day, and the Joint Finance Committee was there. This may have been something related, but not necessarily the governor's listening session. But it was a day where people were coming up to the mic and everybody was giving their thoughts on their priorities and what was important to them. And some of the things I heard over and over and over again were, yeah, healthcare costs, education costs, and schools being underfunded, things like that. So I'm sure, some of those themes will continue to emerge time and time again, no matter who the governor is for the next few cycles or until they are resolved. And when I heard you speak, at the Persisters meeting, I thought you had a really interesting background and insight on the schools. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about your perspective on school funding and what your approach or plans are for that. Because being in the Wauwatosa, the Milwaukee area, I know your kids went to, I believe, public school, but you also seem to be pretty knowledgeable about the voucher program as well and have insight for that some of the other candidates aren't dipping into as much. Would you mind talking about that a little bit and what your plans are for education?
Sure. So, first of all, like, we have a 33-year-old school funding formula. It was created and introduced in 1993. and it's never worked for kids. And we see it. I think we had that discussion when I was in Wauwatosa. That was just after the Chris Taylor election, where we all celebrated that result. But on that same day, there were 72 school districts that went to referendum, and 60 of them were for operations, meaning that it wasn't to build a new middle school or a new science classroom. It was to keep the lights on and just do the basics. And that is, as much as anything, just a condemnation of what's going on at the state level, because we're pitting kids against taxpayers, property taxpayers
Mm.
against students and outcomes in the classroom. And that's not who we are as Wisconsin. It's never been something that's been, how we got to be a state that was well known for our educational outcomes. At the same time, just in the last few weeks, you probably have seen the recovery from COVID numbers for states where they're measuring how each state is doing. 38 states were measured when it came to math outcomes. Wisconsin finished 33rd. 35 states when it came to reading. Wisconsin finished 30th. Like, those are not outcomes that are good enough for us. And so the thing that I have proposed is that, you know, in order to get out of this endless cycle of referendum to referendum and pitting property taxpayers against kids, we should do what so many other states have done, is to say, okay, every kid, do a kid-centric model for funding. Every kid has this value. And then you add on the necessary amount to spend on special education, for urban poverty, for rural poverty, for English language learners. Like, that's how you build a system that meets the needs of kids. What we have is truly, like, they took a snapshot of what districts were spending in 1992. And if you were spending artificially low in 1992, you've been kind of getting screwed for 3 decades, and your classrooms, and that's what the way we have been. And it's not something that has gotten us to outcomes that we need, and it hasn't been something that allowed us and afforded us to have the right level of engagement and investment from the state and from local government. So, getting back to 2/3 funding of education is another thing we have to move forward on. And I'll tell you, like, so that's fundamentally what I think what we need to do. But when it comes to, like, the voucher program and innovation, I live in the city of Milwaukee. My kids attended the Milwaukee Public Schools. It's been here for 35 years. And we can argue, and I have plenty of policy discussions for people around, the idea that this was set up for poor kids to have an alternative in challenged school systems and challenged school districts. Like, that's something that we've had discussions about in Milwaukee over the course of the last 30 plus years. The most of the growth in the voucher program is the statewide program. It's outside of Milwaukee. It's outside of Racine. It's communities where it's now been demonstrated that in most of those cases, the kids who are now getting a voucher to go to a private school were never in the public school. Their parents were paying for them to go to the private school before they ever had a voucher. There's the largest recipient of vouchers in the state of Wisconsin, to the tune of, I think, $44 million, is mostly a virtual school. It's not for, it's not a school that has gymnasium or cafeteria or science labs. It's a group that's going to virtual schooling, which is, hey, I'm okay, but I think it's a loophole that's being exercised if we're paying for the kids to go to those types of schools. So, like, the first things we should do on the voucher program, there's a cap that has come off at the end of this school year that should absolutely go back on, of 10%. We
Like
should
a
close
salary cap for families?
a cap of how many students in each district, how many students could participate in that statewide program. That cap is now
Oh, okay.
gone as of the end of this school year, and we should absolutely put that back on. And we should make sure that, that where there's loopholes that people are using to do things like be have kids go to virtual schools, we should do that. The level of transparency, the city of Green Bay has on its property tax bill, here's how much money is being siphoned away for vouchers. Like, that's something we should be able to do statewide. There should be that level of transparency that we have. So, like, those are things that, as we continue to move forward, and, I don't think we're in a situation where will ever be a one size fits all, where one size fits all is what we should have when it comes to education. We should be public education focused. I want to make sure that I am a governor that does it, but ultimately it's about, where are we getting to those better outcomes? How do we not finish 33rd out of 38 states or 30 out of 35? Like, how are we getting to a point where the outcomes are worthy of the kids and they're propelling them into the future that we want for them?
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point that you brought up, and as I talk to people, sometimes it's This education thing is so big and insurmountable, it feels like sometimes there isn't gonna be a one size fits all, it's not black or white. I don't believe it's like, just stop the voucher program altogether right now because there's gonna be a lot of kids and families that suffer from that who do need this program, and it is helping them, and they're in school right now. So taking an approach of, like, where can we plug some holes and be strategic so the least amount of kids are falling through the cracks and, like, pulling more people along because what I mean, what do we wanna invest in if it's not in education and our children in our state?
Well, and I'll tell you,
Unless
like,
it's to starve the system of funding so then people can point at the problems that they created by not funding it maybe? I don't know.
well, and in Wisconsin, we've been in a situation where, it was a revelation to me when I took over as the Secretary of Administration, and we were the human resource wing for all of state government. You probably know this, but the agency that has the most employees in state government, you know what that is? And it's not even close. It's the Department of Corrections. Like if we don't do what we're going to do with education, you are going to see, the ramifications of that down the line in the prison system, in the judicial system. And so, it is a question of values. It's a question of making smart investments, and government should be about that. Government doesn't run always like a business, but where you can either do stuff at the front end and see the results of that, or you can wait and see what happens at the back end. And like, for me, whether it's a value judgment or it's an economic argument, the smarter investment is to do it up front. And we, for a long time in Wisconsin, have kind of gotten that. It's been a little bit upside down. So, like, that's where if we can, with a Democratic governor, with Democrats in charge in the legislature, like this is the kind of stuff where we can start to make some real progress. That's what's exciting to me about the prospects of where we are starting this fall and moving forward.
Yeah, I love that. And then the other thing I wanted to ask you about was, another insurmountable challenge that anybody will kind of be looking to fix is healthcare. Healthcare costs are out of control for a lot of people. A governor would have to work with the legislature to figure something out and hopefully put some new ideas forward so that again people aren't just getting crushed by these healthcare bills or going uninsured. One of the things I heard you talk about that is was unique that I haven't heard other people talk about was making sure every kid is at least covered. Can you talk a little bit about that?
It starts with, like, what are our shared Wisconsin values? We should work towards getting everybody, coverage for as many people as possible. But, like, it should be a Wisconsin value. There's like somewhere between 5 and 7% of kids who don't have health insurance right now. If we said, at the beginning of 2027, that if you are a family that's within 300% of the federal poverty level, we're going to make sure that your child is insured. Like, that's a Wisconsin value I think that we can do. And yes, it's not going all the way, but it is getting us to a point where some of the most important things that we can do and laying out those judgments, like we can start to do that immediately, even as we're working on other things. Now, we should expand Medicaid, even though it doesn't hold the same value to us as it would have had Scott Walker done it when he first had opportunities to more than a decade ago. We should have a public option available, for everybody. And we should maybe to be able to measure how other states that have been ahead of Wisconsin on this, how they're doing, what the context is, as we enter into next year, because, like we know that the federal government is not going to be our partner on this in the way that they have been. When
Mhm.
you've got $800 billion being taken out of Medicaid, where you've got, in the next year, about 6 million people that they're trying to kick off food share and SNAP benefits, including a million kids. Like, that's not good enough for us as Americans. But what can we control at the state level, and how can we start to make sense of those things? Like, again, you may have also, if you were in that conversation, you heard me say, I think at any given time there are something like 26 out of our 72 counties where there isn't a practicing OBGYN right now. Like, this is
Mhm.
a crisis in Wisconsin when it comes to everything about prenatal visits, about delivering babies, about your well baby care, but even for just general women's health and our health care, it's that kind of area where access is being, it's not available or being denied to people. And we've got to make sure we're making strides on all of those things.
Yeah, and I'm also glad you brought that up because, we've had that 1849 abortion ban got put back into place after Dobbs. And, it's kind of gone back and forth a bit here in Wisconsin, and we do have some restored care, but it's not guaranteed. And I think Planned Parenthood is only operating in a couple locations now. And what people might not realize about Planned Parenthood is when they used to have many more places they were operating, they do a lot more than
Yes.
abortion care. They do cancer screening, just well visits, many things for people who are maybe in rural communities and don't the hospitals are closing and they don't have access to it. So next week will be the 4-year anniversary of Dobbs and that decision from the Supreme Court, reversing Roe v. Wade. What is your plan or your promise to the women here in Wisconsin about what you plan to do to fully restore their reproductive freedom and right to access healthcare and contraception and all of those things?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we have been on the defense on so many of these issues. And again, we're not going to be where we need to be at the federal level probably for some time. So we control what we can control. Taking that 1849 law off the books is something that I think and any candidate on the Democratic side should and will be for. And that's something that with allies in the legislature and with the Democratic governor, we should get done. There are other things that have been restricted around telehealth, around having to have ultrasounds and things related to prescription drugs, and all of those things that I think instead of just trying to ward off the worst of what's happening at the federal level, we can start to go on the offense. On these issues. I have a 20-year-old daughter. Her decisions about her body are between her and her doctor. I'm going to respect that as her parent. We need to respect it as society, and we sure as hell should do it as government. Like, those are just kind of the basics when it comes to the basic women's rights and human rights. And I think we deserve a governor who's going to stand in that and stand up for those rights.
Yeah. Speaking of, so I know you have 2 kids, but I think you said you grew up one of, is it 11?
11 kids. Yes. Yes.
How you gotta tell me a little bit about that. Like, how were your parents was your mother pulling her hair out? Or, like, how was that experience growing up? And I wonder if, like, how did that shape you, the chaos of that for government and politics? There must be some similarities, I gotta think.
Well, there are some. I mean, I am a relationship person, and my career has been about relationships, maybe because I was born into this, large relationship family. I'll tell you, and I talk to other people who come from large families. It's not like necessarily you even grow up in one family of 11. You have kind of two halves, because
Mhm.
the first half were adults by the time that I came along. I'm the 10th of 11. Our family even got a little more complicated because my oldest sister at age 17 got pregnant, had a child. And so my younger sister has a niece who's older than she is. My mom and my sister had babies right around the same time. And like, this is something that happens in large families. And so, I wouldn't trade it for the world. I have siblings who have done just wonderful things, and I look up to every one of them. And and if I win this race for governor, I will still be the little brother to all but one of my siblings, and they will treat me as that. And that's something that is comforting for all of us when it comes to our family. We've lost two siblings, so there are 9 of us left, and we gather. We started during COVID having phone calls or having Zoom calls every week. Now we've gone to every couple of weeks. Unfortunately for me and my campaign, there aren't many voters in Wisconsin. My siblings are all around. They're in different states. They have come up and they have spent time with me. I have a sister who's an OBGYN in Northern Illinois. She took time off a couple of days earlier this year, drove me to Green Bay, drove me to La Crosse. She's delivered like 12,000 babies. And we were talking
Wow.
about the situation in Wisconsin and what it means and around women's health. Like, I have some of that expertise, certainly, that I can lean into from other relationships, but these are people who have done amazing things, and I want their involvement now. I mean, and it is different. You get to be different in relationships with people, even with your own children, when they get to be adults. I think I saw a video of your son talking to Giannis and getting a
Yeah.
nod from him. Like, that's something to remember. But ultimately, and before you know it, he's going to be an adult. Like, my kids are at 19 and 20. My wife and I now have adult conversation with them. We have different levels of experience. I mean, that's The thing that is absolutely wonderful about families and parenthood is you're in all of those stages and you kind of it's inevitable. If you're going to stick around, you will move to all of those stages, but being able to be part of that is like that is as much as anything the gift of a lifetime and the gift of parenthood and families.
Yeah, and I'm sure just with such a big family growing up, but even now, when you guys get together, I'm sure it's just like becoming normalized to the chaos and knowing how to kind of float through that. And speaking as somebody who has a little brother, I'm sure that they all keep you humble, which I do think is probably good for a governor. Which, like, how much of governing as the top executive in the state do you think is really about the governor versus how much of it is about just steering the ship in the right direction and really about the both the people around you and the people who live here in this state?
I mean, I will tell you this, and I was proud to be part of the governor's cabinet. It is about the selections of the people around you. It's about the company you keep. It's about making sure that there is a level of decisiveness. And if there's something that I lay out as a distinction between me and others who are running in this race, all of whom are good people and they bring their own lived experience to it. For the last 2 decades, I really have had nothing but executive experiences where I have run complex organizations like the state's largest science museum. I had the top appointed position in the governor's cabinet during a time of crisis and had to deliver there. For the last 4 years, I've served as the head of the Greater Milwaukee Committee, which is a civic organization that brings together business leaders and nonprofit leaders and higher ed. Like, but all of those experiences have been about making decision, being ultimately held to account for, and being responsible for large budgets, complex organizations. Like that is the job of being governor, is ensuring that you can be decisive on those things, that you can have that direction. It's about temperament. It's about surrounding yourself with those types of people. And I'd like to think that over the course of my career, that's what I've been about. When I have an issue that I have a challenge on, there may be a memo that I have, but I'm going to call somebody who knows that issue better than I do, and I'm going to lean into that. Like I have the benefit of having these relationships I've developed over the course of 35 years. Most of those people are smarter than I am, including all these people in my family. I am going to get their input and insight when I'm got a decision to make or when I'm needing to understand something from the ground level. Like that's the only way I know. That's the way that I was reared. That's the way that I have led over the course of my career. And I think that's what we need and what I'd like to bring to being governor.
So somebody who can pick up the phone and resolve some conflict rather than maybe like tweeting at them. I think that's probably a good quality of somebody we want to look for as our governor.
And yeah, I'll tell you, I mean, it's even like I think back to the days of COVID, and I would spend my time oftentimes in the state office building at Sixth and Wells. I live in Milwaukee, and I wasn't driving all the way to Madison because there simply weren't people around. But I would sit like this at a conference room during the day, and I'd talk to local elected officials around the state. Tell me what's going on the ground. Do you need more PPE? What's the situation economically in your community? What I never asked them was, are you a Democrat? Are you a Republican? Are you a conservative? Are you a progressive? Like, that's where the rubber meets the road. And I'd like to think that that's the kind of situation. Yes, you need to do that in times of crisis, but even for at least what passes as normal times, and these are not anything but normal, but like that level of communication and that level of, okay, we better be about getting something done. Like, yes, I think we need that. And I think we have, Wisconsin can go back to being a model of how you do that as opposed to what we see at the federal level, which is all about vengeance, all about grievance.
Hmm.
Let's win and rub somebody's noses in it. Like, not good enough for me. It's never been the way I've operated. And if we're about getting even instead of getting ahead, then in Wisconsin, we're going to lose. And we're going to lose to other upper Midwestern states. We're going to lose as we try to compete nationally. Like, I think that there's a better way for us.
Yeah, and I mean, I can confirm that speaking with people from all over the state, people they do just they want to get ahead. They just want to move on, get rid of the drama and try and get things done because yeah, it is scary right now at the federal level and at least we can have a steady ship here at home and a place for our families to grow up in and make sure everybody at least can be safe and have a place to live and have food and have a good education and thrive. Joel Brennan, thank you for talking to me. Can you please let people know where they can find more information about you and when to vote?
Sure. The primary is August 11th. I think we passed the 8-week mark on Tuesday of this week.
Wow.
So, it feels right around the corner and far away all at the same time.
Mhm.
And as you said, like we started spending money on commercials last week. And so that's for some people when the campaign really starts, and they'll see more of that from me and from others. We were the first people to do it. You'll see more of my family in this to come. You can get more information about me at brennanforwi.com. And there's all the other social media and everything else that we're doing. And, I welcome people getting a chance to learn more about me. I'm not the best known candidate in the race. I'm not somebody who's held elective office before. I do believe that having held the job that really is about helping the governor run the executive branch and all of the complexity and all that goes into that, and doing it during a time of crisis, is something that has put me in good stead to being a leader. And I would be thrilled to have people explore more about me, ask me good questions like you have today, and learn more about me before August 11th.
Well, thank you so much. We will get this out to everybody so they can understand more about your background and what you do. I certainly learned a lot and really enjoyed this, and I hope to see more ads soon, especially of your kids roasting you. That's my favorite part.
Very good, Kate. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.